Hello and welcome to our question and answer session following the Autism Strategy Conference that was launched on the 5th of October a couple of weeks ago. Today we have a panel that's been put together to respond to the questions and comments that were brought up as a result of the various presentations. Just as a reminder, there are about 30 different presentations this year in this year's conference. They're all accessible through the Autism Network Scotland YouTube channel. I'm pleased to say there have been a lot of interest, lots of views of the presentations there. I think the last time I looked, at least 13 of the presentations had over 100 views, and Damien Milton's presentation in particular, over 700 views. So our spread and our reach for the conference already is significantly increased on what a live event might have covered. So very pleased about that. What I'm going to do very quickly is introduce the panel to you in order. We have Annette Pyle from the Scottish Government, who's going to wave her hand now. And there you go. Thank you, Annette. Next to Annette, we've got KB from Autism Rights Group Highland. Hi, KB. And then we have Marion McLaughlin from the AAAs in Aberdeen. We have Charlene Tate from Scottish Autism. And then we've got Nick Ward from National Autistic Society in Scotland. Katrina Stewart from the Swan Network. And we've got also another Marion Rutherford from NATE. So that's our panel today. Here at Autism Network Scotland, we've collated the questions and the comments that have come in directly through us and also through the YouTube channel. Rather than many particular direct specific questions, there's been quite a lot of more general comments. So the format for the feedback for this year's conference, we've decided to collate the topics, the feedback into kind of 8 different question areas, discussion areas. And rather than a specific question to be answered, we're looking for the panel to contribute to a short discussion on each of those topics. So it might be, if you have put forward a specific question or comment, hopefully that will be captured in those these discussion areas. Okay, so let's kick off. The first kind of area of discussion that people came back to around it was around the autism strategy itself. Comments and questions range from what comes next, how can people engage with that discussion and that decision about what comes after the strategy. We're approaching we're certainly in the last year of our 10-year strategy, and really concerns about what comes next, how people can engage with that. Conscious that there's an evaluation exercise ongoing that's just started. Some concerns around what we don't want, or what the community don't want, is more mapping and more counting, but that indeed something needs to happen after that strategy. So Annette, can I come to you in the first instance, just to kind of bring us up to speed with what's happening with the strategy, approaching the end, and what happens next, and how people can engage with that?
Okay, thank you, Richard, for that question. So the strategy, yes, the original autism strategy was published in 2011, and we're in the final year of implementation and delivery of that strategy. Now, what we have been doing during COVID is really been engaging with stakeholders around some of the emerging issues that have come out of COVID. And we are in the process of developing a transition and transformation framework that will be a bridge to a future policy. Because of the situation that we're in with COVID, it wouldn't really be appropriate to start to engage around the development of a new strategy, that we need to address the issues that are emerging out of the situation that we are in. Richard, you're right in saying that there is currently an evaluation ongoing at the moment. Blake Stevenson have been appointed as the independent evaluators, and we are currently working with them and on the remit of the evaluation, and we will enable individuals to engage and stakeholders to engage with that evaluation, which we'll be publishing sort of like post-March next year. So in terms of the draft framework, the situation with that is that we are engaging internally with other wider policy colleagues at the moment, and we will be engaging nationally over a digital platform that will enable people who want to engage with us to engage over the priorities that have been identified in that framework. That framework, when it's published in December, will probably take us, bridge us over the next 18 months, 2 years, and then we'll, during that period, we'll start to look at a future policy development and engagement on that.
Okay, thanks, Annette. Would anybody else like to come in on that, on the kind of strategy, the wider context of the strategy and what comes next? No? Okay. Okay, thanks, Annette. Shall we move on to our next topic area? Some local authorities, comments around from specific areas across Scotland. Some local authorities are doing well, others quite behind that, or certainly not up to in the same as developed services, issues around inclusion, issues around local strategies. Areas are doing better or worse than others, and it's not a consistent picture across the country. Comments that have come through are both challenges about that, in terms of, why is that? What is it that has made the difference? And also, what can be done to kind of support and move forward in the local authority areas where progress hasn't been as significant as in indeed other areas. I think it's interesting to speculate and to reflect on why have some areas of the country done better than others over this last 10 years in terms of provision of support and services to autistic people. Annette, I'm going to come to you again first for that one.
Thank you, Richard. Yes, it is a very difficult question to respond to in terms of it has always been that with local decision making comes an inconsistency of implementation of services across Scotland, and that's that's always been the situation. We have tried over the course of the strategy, when we provided each of the local authorities with their mapping reports, and then provided some funding for local action plans and strategies to be taken forward, and then the hope was that each of the local areas would look at their mapping, would look at their a development of an action plan, and then deliver on that action plan. And the situation has been that there isn't a standard approach to that, and that it's been delivered inconsistently across Scotland. you know, we have had discussions with our partners, COSLA, on that, you know, we would hope that the inconsistencies across the local authorities is something that could be addressed. They have also been highlighted in the cross-party groups report and review of the autism strategy. Perhaps maybe Charlene or Nick might want to come in here on that.
Thanks, Annette.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'd be happy to, if that's all right, Annette. Thank you for the question. I think it's such an important point to highlight. And what came really, really clear through the CPG report was that there's a massive postcode lottery across the country about what services look like. But not just what they look like, but also how you access those services, how you get treated throughout those services, and what those outcomes are. And I think actually it's a deeper problem in some ways than we even think, because if you look at different health and social care partnerships and how they're set up and operate, there's no inconsistency on that. There's no consistency on that level either. So it's something that the cross-party group report really highlighted, and something which I think the lived experiences of people tell us is something that really affects them. Now, I suppose us as an organisation, and I'm sure others would agree with this, and think that, as Annette said, there's no reason why there needs to be this inconsistency across different places. There's no reason why people should still have to say that they have to fight for services that they should be entitled to. And one of the things which I think is really exciting going forward, and it'll be really interesting to see what comes out of it, is a review into social care that's currently being done by Derek Freely. Now, that's meant to report back, I think, it's either December or January, and it will be so interesting to see, because one of the things that that we've been representing to him, and I think other groups have been as well, is that that inconsistency causes lots and lots of harm. In fact, it causes more harm than people might think, and so something does have to be done about it.
Thanks, Nick. Anybody else want to chip in on this? Marion? You need to put your volume on.
Hello.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Right. For the last 2.5 years, we've been working very, very closely with Aberdeen City Council on its autism strategy. And I would like to raise it as an example of some good practice. Now, I'm not saying that everything in Aberdeen is brilliant, because it's not. But the way that the strategy has been put together, I'm actually very proud of. We were asked to feed in, as I said, about 2.5 years ago, right at the beginning of the writing of the strategy. We held groups for parents and for professionals, but we also held sort of a feed-in group for just autistic people, which worked incredibly well, because it meant that the autistic participants were feeling a lot more relaxed about sharing their experiences without any kind of worries, which was really, really good. It had myself and 2 of my other colleagues as well, all of us being autistic, writing things like the description of autism at the beginning. We were very, very closely involved in what the targets were meant to be as well. Now, what I was quite surprised at was that not every council has somebody who is autistic actually sitting on their local strategies. And that's something that I would very, very much like to see changing moving forward. Because there were several times whenever they would be talking about something during the strategy meetings, and not having somebody who's autistic there meant that they missed out on a lot of the insights into what our community really wants and what it really needs. And I think moving forward, definitely involving more autistic engagement and having people like myself sitting on these strategies is going to make it a lot better for the community. And I'd also like to say that we've had some fantastic support from Nate, from the National Autism Implementation Team, in putting things forward, which we've really, really valued. Just before we went into lockdown as well, we had a look over all of the goals that we'd set for our first year for the autism strategy in Aberdeen City, and we'd achieved all of them. And that was through a lot of partnership work and a lot of goodwill. Had it not been for COVID, I would hope that we would be a bit further along. But where that partnership work has taken place, with the good links into the local autistic community, I'm really proud of what we've achieved up here.
Great, thanks, Marion. Katrina, you want to come in now?
Yes, no, that sounds brilliant, Marion. Swan also, because we've got quite an extensive network now, we're able to kind of call on that for things like the Scottish Government's review of the strategy, and we've been able to have quite a lot of input into things like that. What I wanted to say though was that a couple of years ago, one of our volunteers was supporting a master's degree student as a project to help her write her dissertation, sort of intern with us effectively. And the project was to identify all the different routes to adult diagnostic assessment in all the different local authorities. And my volunteer got really, really stressed because she was trying to set up a project that she couldn't get access to that information. And what I said to her was, "But that is the finding, because if it's really hard for people to get access to that information, then that's what you're finding, is that it's not consistent across all the local authorities." The good thing about that, and I do want to finish on an up as well, the good thing about that is that when we can identify some of these, because as autistic people we're going, well, what is the need? And we identify where there is a gap, we can start doing something about it. We can come up with solutions. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Katrina. And Marion, you wanted to come in there? Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose just to echo what the other Marion said, that I think we really need to learn from where it's gone well. And while it is really important to identify the problems, it's also really important to not lose where people have done things that have worked, and to recognise that sometimes this kind of systemic change takes time and persistence, and you might not see the fruits of all your labour within 6 months or within a year, or within your timescale for measurement. If we're trying to change inclusive attitude in hearts and minds, that's something that happens over a period of time. So I think we need to identify also, as we're going forward, some strategies have focused more on adults, because that's the people who've taken that on in their area. Some have focused more on children, some have done both, some have included diagnosis, some haven't. So I think as well there's been the allowance of individualised approaches across localities, but it's sometimes dependent on who's happened to have got the leadership. And maybe we learn from that going forward, that those partnerships and making sure that there is representation across the board is how we take it forward.
Yeah. Thanks, Marion. Absolutely. And KB.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Marion was saying, that it's very much to do with individuals. We were very involved with writing the strategy in Highland, but unfortunately it's still a draft strategy. It kind of lost its way and got forgotten. And it's a shame that COSLA aren't here, because I think this is really a question mainly for COSLA. I think that unless something becomes mandatory, or unless there's a statutory duty to do things, I think we might just, I'm worried that we're just going to bimble along getting lost with things half done, and then something else comes along, or someone leaves their post. The passionate person who was driving it might leave their post. So yeah, I just wanted to agree with that. And I sound a bit like the voice of doom and gloom. And I don't, we need carrot and stick, but I think at the moment it's all a bit wishy-washy in a lot of local authorities. The thing of the moment, and then it's not the thing of the moment anymore.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I think you're right, KB. Often it does depend on the right person in the right place with the moving things forward. Aware from a comment from one other local authority, kind of not represented here, but we're saying that things really moved on when the person was driving it, but then they moved on, they moved position, and things have stalled since then. So yes, it does come back to the getting the right person in the right place sometimes. So thanks for your comments around that area. I'd like to move us on to our next question, our next topic, which is around training and professional knowledge. The reflection that despite lots of training having taken place, lots of professional development, there are still gaps that are being experienced by autistic people and families across Scotland. And maybe this is similar. It depends where you are and who's around as to how things are progressing. And the question is, how can that be addressed? So I'm going to come to you, Marion, first on this one. What are your thoughts around the training and development of professional knowledge and the gaps that still exist?
Well, at the One Stop Shop Aberdeen and AAA's, we do a tremendous amount of training, and we've done it across all kinds of sectors. So it's something that we do have quite a lot of experience of giving. A lot of what we do whenever we first go into somewhere is myth busting, because whenever you have people who've been delivering training who are still believing that most of us have a learning disability, or that most of us lack empathy, or that most of us aren't going to meaningfully engage with other people, then we have to break down these myths before we can then go ahead and do anything else. And I think training is only as good as the person who's delivering it, really. So if you've got somebody who's going in with an awful lot of internal bias, that's going to make it very, very difficult to necessarily get good quality information about it. One of the things that we consistently hear whenever we are delivering training sessions is that hearing it from autistic people is completely invaluable. And Catriona and I have delivered training sessions together as well. And again, all we hear is being able to really explore these issues from an autistic point of view has been much more valuable than anything else that they've attended. So if we're going to sort of look at gaps in professional knowledge, I think, first of all, we need to bust down those myths even more, which I'm delighted that the Scottish Government's marketing campaign is currently doing. But then we need to build it up using language that's inclusive, using language that the autistic community is comfortable with, and sort of addressing the issues that autistic people actually do face. Because quite often we'll go in somewhere and they'll say, well, we've done this and that and the next thing for autistic people, but they've not actually asked the autistic people whether or not those were things that they needed. So we need to do an awful lot of work in that sense. I mean, moving forward, what I would like to see is a sort of a development of a framework that was written with autistic people at the heart of it, having trainers who are going out there and talking about autism who are either autistic themselves or have been trained by autistic people. Because if you're missing that lived experience, you're still going to have gaps in the knowledge and understanding.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. I was really interested to hear that phrase, myth busting, and having been involved in autism training for many years, we were myth busting 20 years ago with people that came forward to training. My question is, and I don't have an answer, is, are they the same myths as they were 20 years ago, or are they different myths?
Well, to be honest, I think it's kind of difficult to say, but last year, when we could still get together in person, I went in and did a couple of training sessions in schools locally. And at the end of each of them, we had people from a charity who I'm not going to name come up to me and said, "Do you have empathy?" Yes. Well, we were told during our training that autistic people didn't have empathy. And this was just last year. And those were people who are supporting autistic people in schools. Yeah. So my guess is that a lot of these myths are still persisting, which is why I'm so very passionate about the government's marketing campaign, because it is doing such a good job in addressing those areas.
Yeah, thanks, I'll be quite and Charlene, you wanted to come in, and then I'll come to you, Katrina.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that knowledge is one thing and applied knowledge is another. And I think that we've got a long way to go within our education and social care professional development before we can actually truly understand what people are doing with the knowledge that they gain. I think for me, working in an organisation like Scottish Autism, it's actually really frustrating that so much investment has to go into something like SVQ, which is a very general, very over-assessed type of award for people who work in social care, when actually if you are working in a specific arena, such as supporting autistic people, there are many more imaginative and creative ways that we could actually strengthen the workforce, and I think that goes for education and health as well. I think that we've got trapped in this sort of one-size-fits-all SVQ model for social care, and it's really not helpful. And so I think that, we are actually drowning in knowledge resources of autism from autistic people, from academics, from practitioners, but it's the application of that knowledge. And when Marion says something like, you've got empathy, I think that's that's a real kind of example, not just of a myth, but also where people have taken an aspect of knowledge that's been presented in a particular context, that's not been challenged, that's not been critiqued, and have just rolled all that up into a kind of mindset. So I think that the issue of training goes really, really much further beyond content and knowledge content and delivery.
Thanks, Charlene. Yes. Katrina, yes?
The first thing is I started studying autism about 20 years ago, and then I started studying for my PhD about 16 years ago. And I would say the myths are really just the same as they've been for that 20 years. And we're still being greeted with the same things like, oh, but you've got empathy, or you've got a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or you've got a job or whatever. Secondly, actually, I completely and utterly agree with you, Charlene, and in terms of how we deliver training. And one of the things we've been doing as part of the employment project, Swan's been delivering our employment project, we are working on how do we make the training that we've been funded to deliver actually really impactful, that it's not just the same old, you info dump a lot of information about, trying to make it something that's much more relevant to where people are. I think I've lost connection here. I don't know if you can still hear me.
We can still hear you fine, although you've frozen.
Can you still hear me? No. Okay.
We
right,
can
I'll try
still
refreshing
hear
the page.
I'll come back to you, Katrina. KB, you had your hand up as well. Do you want to come in there, KB, while Katrina's getting sorted?
Yeah, I did. What I wanted to say first is that it's never difficult to fill a training course, which is great. People are excited and they really want to hear. Particularly, we do training from autistic people, and people really love it, and they feel really empowered and really excited, and they learn lots and they want to go and implement it. But then that's when the problem can come, giving people the tools to implement it. So they'll go back to their workplace and they'll struggle because the old culture is still in the workplace. So if we have, like, for example, in education, whole school approaches can work really, really well, like the St Clement's example in Dingwall. But when you're training just a few support staff or the odd person in a setting, it can be it can actually do harm, because you're really demoralizing. That's not how you say that word, is it?
Demoralize.
You know what I mean? Yeah, that word. Yeah. Yes. It can be really demoralizing. Why can't I say the word?
It can be really demoralizing.
Yeah, thank you. For the staff member, because they can often, a lot of the people that come on our courses are more junior staff, because they're the ones that kind of get sent. And then for them to kind of feed back to the rest of the team and to try and make changes could be really hard. So I don't know how you can kind of think about, when offering training, or the government, or I suppose it's local councils and local authorities, or wider, large employers can think about, someone's going on a training course, but it's not just a training course for that person. We have to really think about how we can use this once they get back to the setting. Otherwise, you end up with miserable staff who are kind of feeling worse than before they went on the training. Yeah. So if that makes any sense, I sort of went around in a circle there.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Katrina, I'll come back to, Katrina might have frozen again. I don't know. Marion, if you're going to come in then, and I'll come back to you, Katrina.
Okay. I suppose I want to kind of echo again, I think it's actually really great that we are pretty much on the same page, and there's a real sort of consensus and drive and passion to move forward with training and think of it in a much more systemic way. So we're not just thinking about everybody going on an autism training, but actually that understanding about autism and inclusive thinking needs to be embedded, and it needs to be something that's delivered in a sustained way, in an ongoing way. It's not something you go to once, and that we think about things like the NEST training framework, or we've got a NAEP professional learning framework for education that thinks about what does everybody need to know, and then what are the opportunities for people to get specialist knowledge. And examples like the local authority we worked in funded 26 places on the Strathclyde Autism postgrad course across health and education, and those 26 people did the course together, have become trainers, there's a a sustainability in that kind of approach. So thinking about training as not just the session that you do, but who are the people who are going to coach and mentor, and who can those people, as you say, the PSAs who've been on a good course, who can they go to when it's not working for them? And I absolutely would echo the whole school approach. We need senior leadership to be on board, and we need senior leadership within local authorities to have the same key messages and understanding and knowledge as the person in the classroom on the ground, or the person in the hospital on the ground. And I think that we have an opportunity to have a kind of the relationships that we have between the 8 people that are here, but other people as well from all sectors, to think about what are the key messages and how do we begin to have a consensus and a consistency in how we deliver training. And as you say, it's not necessarily the person, it's the message, isn't it? It's how we all send that message across, and how we help people to live it and to feel it, so that they don't just hear that learning, but they think, right, that means that when I'm back in my place, this is what I'm going to do, kind of thing.
Okay, thanks, Marion. And Katrina?
Yeah, I don't know how much you missed or whatever, but it sounds like people have been saying very much the same things about, a whole organisation approach. And certainly what we're finding is that you can have a really, really brilliant inclusion, value statement, but that doesn't necessarily mean that people are able to roll that out on the ground. The line managers, the people with heading up departments aren't necessarily supported in rolling those policies. So it's really important to support the organisation. The other thing I want to say is what we're also doing in the project, talking to the autistic employees, because we want to have a look at what to them staying in employment, and actually listen to them about the things that are troubling them. And some of it is, but autistic perfectionism, for example, thing in an employee is really a challenge. So we need to be able to be supporting autistic individuals as well. Anyway, now.
Thanks, Katrina. I think we got most of that. I think that there's a slight problem with your signal there. I don't know if that's something that can be fixed. Anyway, I'd like to move us on to our next area for discussion, which is around diagnosis. There were 2 or 3 presentations on the conference this year around diagnosis, a couple of them looking at diagnostic tools that can be used to help support the process. Obviously, diagnosis and improving that has been a strong theme, a primary theme of the strategy for the last 10 years. And yet comments are still there that it is, to some extent, a bit of a postcode lottery and not great in some areas, although recognition that in some areas there have been significant improvements. So again, it's a similar question, is, well, what can be done now to continue that improvement, particularly in those areas where it is still problematic? I'm going to start by coming over to you, Marion, on that one.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, probably as you're aware, the Autism Achieve Alliance did a piece of work funded through the Scottish Autism Strategy early on, which identified a kind of evidence base to what makes a diagnostic service efficient and effective. And we then were funded to look at specifically adult diagnostic services and reducing waits within those. We learned a lot from that, and have continued to try to sort of use that evidence in a range of children's services as well. And I guess we're in a different position in that we do know a range of things that work, and certainly where there is a health board that are funding and resourcing a diagnostic service, are very happy to support that discussion. And we're involved in a piece of work at the moment, bringing together children's diagnostic services to progress this with that sort of group of services as well. But I think, I suppose another thing to recognise is that internationally, in countries where there are nationalised health systems, diagnostic waiting times are still an issue. And I think we need to take that broader approach, as well as focusing on specific services. We need to learn together, I suppose, about how we go forward. I think in children's services, GIRFIC really helps, because we definitely have the principle of nothing should be diagnosis dependent. And that's a message that really needs to be supported. On the other hand, that doesn't mean that diagnosis isn't necessary, and we very much recognise that diagnosis is a really important thing and makes a difference. And I think particularly perhaps for adults, there is a difference still in terms of the support you can access once you receive a diagnosis. So in terms of moving forward, certainly there are pieces of work that are ongoing. I think COVID has obviously created a barrier, or has created a halt, which we're going to have to find solutions for. It's also created opportunities for people to think slightly differently, perhaps, about what's the core information, how we gather it, and how we pull all that together, which tools we use. So there's an opportunity at the moment to kind of rethink processes. And so hopefully, the other bit, I suppose, is that we're much further forward in terms of every health board in Scotland has a child diagnostic pathway. Autistic people are involved in the development of local services, certainly within children's services, and we're moving towards that within adult services. The other aspect that I think perhaps, I don't know whether Annette would want to talk about, is key performance indicators. So perhaps now is a good time to think about setting some standards that we work towards for health boards, so that it's not just the people on the ground, the passionate, motivated people who are driving improvements, but that actually there's a top-down focus, I suppose, as well, so that local health boards have a set of standards that they're working towards, as well as the people on the ground.
Okay. Thanks, Marion. Does anybody else want to come in around the area of diagnosis? Okay, yes, Marion, other Marion.
Yeah, we're very fortunate up here in Aberdeen that Marion Rutherford has come up and sort of given us a lot of really good support, and Annette as well, in helping to set up a diagnostic pathway for adults locally, which we are hoping to roll out whenever it is safe to do so. But I just wanted to say that again, on the assessment and diagnosis working group, there's myself and a couple of other diagnosed autistic people that have really helped to inform how the pathway should be put together, and sort of being able to take that local information and the experiences of other autistic people, so that we're hoping that whenever our pathway does get put out, that it can address some of these inequalities that we've heard from elsewhere. So we've put together sort of information for GPs, so that they're aware that you can be married, university educated, have children, have a full-time job, and be autistic, because these are some of the things that we quite often hear GPs in other areas sort of saying, that they you can't be autistic and be these things as well. So again, it comes back to the myth busting again, which is always a theme of the work that we do, right? But I'm quite passionate and really keen to see what it's going to be like once we do get it rolled out. And I think that close involvement of the autistic community will make a big improvement whenever it does.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you. Katrina?
Yes, I mean, you know what I'm going to say, really. It's still a big issue with any of the diagnostic services as to how well informed they are in terms of gender stereotyping. Again, as Marion's saying there, more autistic-led input into the diagnostic services, the training of people who run diagnostic services, the better, because that's why a lot of this stuff's getting missed. I was actually really delighted recently to be approached by a clinical psychologist who'd been asked to deliver training on autism to psychologists. And she approached me and she said, well, I've told them I'm happy to do it, but not without an autistic person actually helping me deliver. And I just thought that's a brilliant way to go. Partnership work, engagement with autistic people, absolutely fantastic. And then COVID hit, so we're not doing the training at the moment. But hey,
Thanks, Katrina. It does sound as though that in terms of diagnosis, that we kind of know what to do. We know the good practice. We know the good models of working on terms of diagnosis. It's just doing it. Annette, you wanted to come in there?
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on the point that Marion Rutherford had raised around the KPIs. In our transition and transformation framework, we want to have a commitment in there around developing a KPI around the diagnostic assessments, so that it isn't a postcode lottery, so that health boards will recognise that it isn't an opt in, opt out, and that it's a diagnostic services that should be implemented in each of the health boards.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. One last comment on this, then, Charlene. Go on.
Yeah, my last comment is, I think over 20 years ago, I attended a conference at Stirling University. Judy Gould was talking about diagnosis, and her exact words were, "It's not rocket science." We seem to have turned it into very, very complicated rocket science, and it doesn't need to be. I think it's unforgivable. There's not any other context where people would be denied a diagnosis, either through geographical limitations or poor understanding of a condition or a context or whatever you want to call it. It's been going on long enough. And I really hope people aren't sitting here in 20 years' time having a similar conversation, because we've all been round this table far too long on this one. We really need to get this sorted, and it's more a plea for come on, folks, than any great words of wisdom. But it's not rocket science, and it shouldn't be presented as such.
Great, thanks, Charlene. I think panel consensus there. I'd like to now move on to the next area, which was really following up the presentation from Nick and Charlene about the accountability gap, and particularly the proposal around an autism commissioner as being a potential part of a solution for that. I think fairly predictably prompted a number of comments coming back in. And I'm sure Nick and Charlene would be able to guess what many of them were. But issues around the consultation process around the Autism Commissioner idea, the challenge of one person carrying that level of responsibility and that workload, and the effectiveness of that, needing to be somebody with lived experience of autism, and the debate around what is it? Would it be a commissioner for autism, for neurodiversity, learning disability, and all that, those kind of questions? So I appreciate there's lots of this is a beginning of a conversation around autism commissioner. But I perhaps if you wanted to just come in there, shall I come to you, Nick, first on that?
Sure. That was quite a sort of compound question, wasn't it? Of sort of here's everything. I think they're all really important questions to ask, and I think for a lot of them we don't have the answer. And I think that, like you said, Richard, is the start of a conversation, not the end of one. I think that when we talked at the beginning of this session, we were talking about the accountability gap. We were already talking about things that people were meant to be doing, but we weren't seeing on the ground. And that was where the idea of the commissioner came from, which was to close that accountability gap. Now, in terms of consultation and engagement, so we did do quite a lot of consultation and engagement, but I think that we didn't get it right, if I'm honest with you. I think that we should have engaged with more people at an earlier place. So I think both myself and Charlene would definitely hold our hands up and say that that process wasn't well run by us. We are engaging now. We want to continue to engage with people and talk about it as a concept. And just to touch on some of the brief points just before I hand over to Charlene, like the question of, is that too much for one person? I think it's too much for one person, 100%. And I think, you've got to understand the process of this is that we don't get to decide exactly what this will look like in the end. And that's really frustrating. We have to come up with an idea, convince people in government, in civil society, and in politics that this idea, this concept is potentially a good one. And then they effectively decide what that looks like. And then our job becomes sort of influencing them. So we start to steer the ship, but ultimately we don't get to captain that ship. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't have some really firm ideas about what we think would be best. So, I think that it should be a commission, not a commissioner, if that makes sense. I think it should be more than one person. I think it's a team of people. I think it's very much up for discussion about how that is structured and what that would look like. I think it needs appropriate funding and support. And I suppose the other thing is that, and I know this is an area which is particularly controversial, and it's one that we are exploring, but I suppose for me, one of the other important parts is that it shouldn't just be for autistic people, and it's about exploring what that looks like as well. And that's for pragmatic reasons. That's in order to get it done. That's in order to build the coalition of support needed to take something and make it into law. And that's also because a lot of the things that this commission would have responsibility for would also support and help other people as well. So I suppose the questions are good, and I think we have to work on the answers together to explore how we do that. Charlene, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to remember that, the driver for this, so there was a commissioner recommended in the independent review of mental health for autistic people and people with learning disabilities. And over the last, many years, we've been raising these sort of, repeated issues around accountability. Things like our not included, not engaged, not involved work through into very sharp relief the actually very disgraceful, in some cases, examples of what's happening within our education system. And the review of the strategy, the recurring theme was this idea of an accountability gap. And KB touched on a couple of things when we were discussing something earlier about a statutory duty. And that's what we're trying to do, is have a mechanism in law that closes that accountability gap. And KB also mentioned the idea of carrot and stick. And I think that it's really important to say that, our vision for a commissioner is not someone going around, beating people about the head and charging them lots of money for not doing their job. It has to be about building good practice. It has to be an enabling role, but there has to be some level of imperative there that people actually get what they need and deserve. I hear many, many times how Scotland's policy and legislation is the envy of the rest of Europe and indeed other parts of the world. But what the lived experience that I hear coming back to me is nowhere near matching that policy, aspiration. So I guess that the commissioner idea has evolved over time. I think that what Nick says is perfectly right. We've unveiled a concept. It's for a very long process that will actually bring it to fruition, if at all. And I think that what we need is a really open conversation about what that role could and should do. A commission, I agree, it's not a one-person job. But if it's not that, what is it? What will close this accountability gap? What will make the difference? Because all of us on this platform and across the many, many other networks and meetings and forums that we share, hear about desperate situations time and time again, and our legislative and policy intent should not be delivering those kind of outcomes for people. People should be experiencing much better quality of service and a better life than they actually are doing. So that's how I would respond.
Thanks, Charlene. That's really interesting. I confess I hadn't imagined a commissioner with a big stick wandering around the country, Charlene, but I now have that image in my head. That'll be hard to shift. Does anybody else want to come in around the commissioner question? No? Okay, I appreciate that. Go on then, Marion, yes? Yeah.
No, I think we just wanted to say that at AAA's we're really keen to see a lot of engagement with the autistic community around what it's actually going to look like. And I know that there have been a lot of concerns raised over just autism and learning disability, which we wouldn't support. But if we were able to look further wider at maybe looking at neurodevelopmental and have some good proper discussions about what is necessary and what is needed and how it would look. And again, we would not like to see somebody going around with a big stick, which I'm not going to be able to get out of my head now, but that could be kind of fun. But we would really, really like to highlight some good practice. And we're currently doing some work with the local education department, and it's going to be about sharing good practice and seeing what the benefits of having proper inclusion means. You know, what does it mean whenever you have proper inclusion? What does it mean whenever you're properly engaging with someone? What do you get out of having a really good inclusion policy? And then once people generally understand the benefits of it and why it's good for the whole of society and not just for the autistic individual, it's good for everybody in their classroom, it's good for everybody in the lecture hall, it's good for everybody in the workplace, then we're more likely to see more of that. So seeing that good practice and sharing it around, I think, needs to be key.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Marion, and thanks, Charlene and Nick. I'd like to move us on now to the next conversation. Oh, sorry, Annette, did you want to quickly come in there?
Yes, very, very quickly. What I wanted to say around the commissioner issue is that you know, we've listened to and heard the recommendations that came up from the independent review of the Mental Health Act, and the recommendation that was made in the cross-party group. And we have made a commitment to explore what that commissioner would look like, and just to give assurances that there will be much wider consultation on that issue. Will be a long journey, because you know, we would need to embed that within not just within policy, it has to be embedded within law. So that, you know, that does take time. So we would need to look at, we'd want to ensure that it can deliver what people, you know, want it to deliver, and that will be based on human rights principles. So I think Nick wants to come in here.
Yeah, over to you, Nick.
If I may, thank you. Yeah, I very much agree with Annette, and I think this is potentially where we've gotten ourselves into a bit of a sticky wicket, because I think maybe we've not described the process well enough. So I think sometimes people have went, wait, you guys want a commissioner and you want it tomorrow and you want it to look exactly like this, and we don't really necessarily agree with that. And I think that's completely fine, like, because that's not what we wanted, but I think that's how it might have come across. So I think, you know, discussing more about the process and how we can all influence, hopefully, that process, and it is a long journey to get there, I think is really important, because ultimately a lot of those sort of questions and decisions won't be up to Scottish Autism or the National Autistic Society. So it's for all of us to influence that along the path. And then just going to Marion's point, like, I completely agree, Marion, and I think we talked about it earlier in the Q&A, which is about there is best practice out there, and we need someone to be finding that best practice and highlighting it and sharing it and developing it with others. And I think that is such a, you know, if anything, that almost should be the critical thing. It's like, find the good stuff, spread it about, support people to do it. 100% agree. But maybe this is the bit, but I also think maybe it doesn't need to be a big stick, but I do think in order for it to really affect people's lives on the ground, there has to be a role to ensuring that people have, as actually Annette said and Charlene, their human rights upheld. And I think the struggle at the moment is that we are hearing constantly that autistic people and family members' human rights aren't being upheld, and we need to support that and enable that to happen. So I think it's a balance, but I definitely think that, you know, I want to emphasize the carrot, not the stick side, if that makes sense.
Okay, we'll leave the stick to Charlene and the carrot to you, Nick.
Perfect. That's what I prefer.
I'm much more a carrot person. I'm just nibbling.
Hang on, where's the autistic people in that then?
No, right, and we're moving on. We're moving on. I'm sorry, I'm very conscious of time and how much time we've got left. Our next conversation topic area was going to be around COVID and the fact that life goes on, concerns about how things have changed and are changing. A number of the presentations, although not necessarily overtly around COVID, obviously reflected that in their discussions, in their presentations. There's an excellent interview between Hugh McAloon and Marion. That's really, really good on that in the presentations there. I'm going to suggest that we actually skip that question, because I can imagine conversation around COVID and its effect on autism is something that could take us 2 hours. And we're not going to do it justice in a couple of minutes. And maybe there's a different way of us thinking about coming back to that. Since Katrina's got a hand up, very quickly, I'll come to you on Katrina on that one.
Well, I was just going to give a little bit of feedback on what I've learned over the period, if you think that would be useful.
Yeah.
A lot of autistic people, and I also ran a survey. So just to, some of this is already in presentations to the conference, obviously, but I would say it's been very mixed. Autistic people's experiences of COVID have been very mixed. Some people have really enjoyed being able to have some peace and quiet and not have to go out. Some people have felt, though, that in the process of that, they were becoming de-skilled, and that was quite worrying about what would happen going forward. Some families have really enjoyed their children not having to go to a toxic environment, or an environment that they experience as being toxic, and some families have really struggled because their children have really hated the loss of routine. And I think, I can identify with that as well. So it's very dependent on people's individual circumstances. Huge amounts of anxiety, obviously, because we're in a situation of massive uncertainty. So I'm not saying anything that's particularly rocket science here. We know that inequalities across the population were highlighted. Sometimes those inequalities have been very stark, but sometimes they're actually quite subtle. And for autistic people, it might be direct loss of services. It might be loss of care support or routines, or the dependency that they have on the carers, their families, sometimes people they don't get on well with, sometimes people who are not sympathetic or supportive or empathetic about their autism. But also maybe sometimes where non-autistic people are operating in conditions of extreme stress and a massively exaggerated workload. Some of the accommodations that people might expect for autistic people participating, being included, are kind of dropped, not deliberately or malevolently, but just because people are under so much pressure. And that's been something that's kind of come up a bit. So the survey I did for the independent advisory group to the Scottish Police Authority, I do talk about it in my presentation, but one of the things that really came out of that for me was that autistic people in general feel they have huge difficulties accessing their human rights in Scottish society already. They didn't feel they were being particularly targeted during COVID in terms of policing or the legislation or whatever, but there were issues around messaging and their ability to understand what it was they were being asked to do. But the most stark thing that jumped out for me was where one of the respondents to the survey mentioned that, she said, "Oh, please don't make people hate us by going on and on about our human rights." And I just thought that is what we have to do something about, because for an autistic adult to think that accessing her human rights meant she was asking for special favors or something kind of extra and that people would hate her for it, I think we have to tackle that internalized kind of, because that's an internalized ableism. That's an internalized kind of, I don't really deserve this. And if I'm pushing for these things, and that ties in with what you were saying, Charlene, actually, that idea that you're not accessing your human rights, but that actually maybe you shouldn't be pushing for it because people are going to really resent you for it. So that was it. I just wanted to do a wee summary of that, just in case you haven't seen my presentation.
Appreciate that, Katrina. Thanks very much. We've got 2 more conversation areas, so I'm going to give them 5 minutes each, if that's okay, but I do want to give the things justice. The next one was around the role of carers, and a couple of comments around that. The role of carers is sometimes still overlooked, and indeed that many carers may be autistic carers themselves. Annette, did you want to perhaps comment on that on the first instance?
Yeah, it was to recognise the role that carers have made during these challenging times. In supporting their autistic family member, you know, during uncertainty and huge change, and it's important to recognise that you know, carers do provide essential services in supporting their children, and is and enabling the autistic child or adult within their family to be able to adjust and to the changes that COVID brought. And I think that you know, that should be recognised going forward.
Thanks, Annette. Anybody else want to come in on the carers? Okay, KB, yes.
I just wanted mainly to say thank you for recognising autistic carers and parents, because I still feel that when accessing services, whether that's school or whether that's children's services or anything really, I can be a parent or I can be autistic. Actually getting recognised as an autistic parent who may have difficulty accessing a service for my children because I am autistic is often overlooked. So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah. Thanks, KB. Yes, Charlene, over to you.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think the other thing, and tied in maybe to the last topic, is, you know, people, I say it all the time, people need people. And I think that throughout this period that has never been more sort of apparent. But I think it's very easy for autistic people, autistic carers, to become invisible in the sort of malaise of all of this stuff that's going on. And I was struck by someone who called our advice line, who said it's taken a pandemic for people to understand that I have needs and that I'm here. And I think that, you know, if we learn anything from this situation, it should be the value of people and the value that people bring to other people, whether that's autistic people caring for other autistic people, or, you know, whoever that is. We have grossly undervalued the value of people, I think. But COVID has brought that into sharp relief.
Yeah, thanks. And last word on this over to you, Marion.
Yeah, I just want to say that whenever we're doing support, especially for parents of autistic children, quite often we're hearing that schools aren't taking them very seriously. If the parents are openly identifying as autistic themselves, they're often seen as less than, hysterical, less able to contribute to their children's welfare. And more often than not, whenever an autistic parent speaks to us about the struggles that they have whenever they're supporting their autistic child, I'm the first person who asks them, and who is supporting you? Because nobody else has been asking that question, and it's actually reduced a lot of parents to tears recently. Happy tears that they're getting asked that question, but, you know, sort of disappointed and frustrated that nobody else had even considered that as a possibility. So yeah, I think more recognition definitely needs to be there for the fact that a lot of parents of autistic children and a lot of parents of grown-up autistic children are actually autistic themselves and putting themselves through a tremendous amount of hard work at the moment.
Yeah, okay. So thanks, Marion. Thanks for concluding on that. Our final topic for discussion, and I think it'll be a fairly short one, it's around the Minister's announcement around the post-diagnostic support. And I suppose that the question that's really coming through, because I appreciate it's news and it's early days in this, is and without going into the details of the funding and the project, is really how will people know what's coming and how it's shaping up. I suppose over to you, Annette, on that in terms of what's coming next.
Yes, this is on the back of the announcement that the Minister for Mental Health, Ms Hockey, announced on the morning of the conference that the Scottish Government were working in partnership with the 3 major charities and autistic people's organisations in the development of a post-diagnostic support offer, a national post-diagnostic support offer, in recognition of the postcodes lottery of support out there. So we have been developing together, working in partnership around what that would look like. And as Charlene said, is that people need people. So we're moving particularly fast on this national offer, and building on the services that are currently available. And we'll have a pillars of support for carers. We'll have pillars of support for autistic people. So yes, it's exciting. It's moving fast, and we'll be announcing a bit more of that next month. Maybe Charlene might want to come in. The Scottish Autism are the sort of like leading and coordinating this work with our partners on that. So over to Charlene.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the sort of long and the short of it. I think that, post-diagnostic support has been on the agenda since the FISH report many, many years ago, and I think that it comes in all shapes and sizes. But in Programme for Government, there was an announcement about a commitment to post-diagnostic support, and it seems a sensible way forward is to utilise those offerings that are already out there, whether they're support to families, peer support, whether it's around late diagnosis, whatever it might be, and to pull together in a collaborative effort and have, very importantly, an independent evaluation of that, so that we can see what people value, what they need more of, what they need less of. Different people might need multiples within that offering, because as we've already discussed, autistic people can be parents, or could be offering peer support. So there needs to be multiple points of entry. So the stage we're at is to look at what those points of entry can be, and make that as simple as possible. And in fact, later this week, we're going to hopefully finalise what the sort of global offering is, and how people might come in and out of those different services if they wish to access it. I think that it's a real challenge, because we have absolutely no idea really what the demand will be in terms of, will lots of parents want family support? Will lots of autistic people want peer support? We really, really don't know. So I welcome the fact that it's a pilot to help us get the kind of a feel for what people genuinely do want, and then we can hopefully take it from there and build. But I think for me, I see it as an opportunity for us to collaborate and do something really tangible and concrete together that can be accessed by people across the country. So it's down to all of us to make it kind of work. So yeah, hopefully we can get it up and moving and running as quickly as possible, and then we'll find out if it's what people want or if they need something different. So good challenge.
Okay. Thank you, Charlene. I'm really sorry, but we have kind of run out of time there. Nice to end on something that's fairly positive, though, and very appropriate for us to do that. So thank you, panel. I'm very conscious that there's a number of areas of discussion that we could have gone on at length for, and perhaps we need to think about how we do that, how we continue this discussion, how we continue these kind of conversations. We've also not covered areas such as advocacy, employment, protection against bad practice, things that other people have raised during the course of this last couple of weeks. I think I would summarize that, just back again on the nature of the conference and it being online this year, the fact that we've managed to engage with far more people viewing the presentations. Obviously, those presentations will still be available for a number of weeks yet, if not longer for some of them. And we continue to encourage people to have a look at them, and we will continue to receive comments and questions, I'm sure, and we'll encourage that, and we'll look at ways that we can continue that and feedback on those. So thank you again, panel. Thanks to Cameron's, our IT folk, our media folk that helped support us and guide us through this new process of online stuff. Great. Thanks very much, panel, and have a good day.
Thank you all.